Well, we are wrapping up the second and final day of the FinOps X conference in San Diego. We thought we'd take a few minutes just to talk about the experience and what we learned and some themes and just kind of open discussion about what our takeaways are. So for those who don't know, Will Norton, CloudBolt, product go-to-market. Introduce yourself.
I'm Deana Solis. I'm a FinOps practitioner and an ambassador with the FinOps Foundation.
Campos. I'm CTO at CloudBolt. Honored to be next to the ambassador.
So we all kind of ran different races. There's a lot going on this week. I'll start by saying I think this year was awesome and certainly elevated. Gotta love being in San Diego. I mean, I think I've been making the joke, not going to Vegas and Orlando for a tech conference is a total breath of fresh air. But beyond that, I think the foundation did just an excellent job. The speakers were great. The venue was really cool. And it definitely felt like a pretty well executed event overall. Would you guys agree?
I would. It definitely, the growth was organic. Sometimes when large events show up, they're pretty artificial and a result of very good marketing and very good networking. But here it was really aligned with the purpose of the FinOps Foundation, which is practitioner-centered.
Yep.
That was my take.
Yeah, it's a big jump from last event, and also it's interesting to you can feel in communities like energy levels, how that represents in the events. I've been, participated in the upswing of communities where you can start seeing like, oh, this is better than last year, and there's more people, and there's, more good conversation. And then also on the sad downswings when you're like, oh, this might be the last one, right? Yeah. And so it's been really cool to see, the community build that momentum and have it kind of all come together.
And in their second year, this is the second time, and it just felt gigantic compared to last year, which was awesome. And I think you guys would agree, even the organizations that showed up this time, it wasn't the folks that were the early adopters that were super excited and passionate about FinOps kind of on the edges. It was, a lot of organizations showed up just because they felt like they had to be a part of this conversation.
I think that's true. I think that sometimes the feedback of what people in technology are actually doing, being able to observe that at scale, which only happens when you have this kind of aggregation.
That's right.
When you have these kinds of communities coming together with such common purpose, big names, big brands, leaders in technology have to pay attention, and right. I think we definitely saw a theme in that.
Yeah. So what's your big takeaways from the event so far? What are talk tracks, common themes, narratives that you've noticed?
So in the foundation, in the framework, we talk a lot about the phases of maturity, and early maturity for certain capabilities and certain domains of knowledge look a certain way. But I really do think that maturity of the practice as a whole has been a theme. And we knew that coming into this, we were all really new at the practice. So many of us had been doing it before it had a name of FinOps. But that sort of critical mass of everyone realizing that we had these skills and these capabilities in common made it make sense that we were talking about it with a common language. And the FinOps framework helps us do that. But also now the practice itself has matured, and we have to think about life cycles of all the different advancements in management, not just that in technology, but in manufacturing and things like that. We've had lean management before. We've had operational excellence before. Of course, the practice of FinOps when people are making each other better, of course we're going to improve, and of course we're going to mature and start asking, well, what's next? And we see each other doing this mirror check. We're not just one and done. We don't start at point A and end at point B. We have to keep this continuous loop, infinity loop of continuous improvement, because the context is going to keep changing.
Absolutely. I want your thoughts on the cloud providers having a presence here, because I felt that was very important, and to see the hyperscalers getting involved and understanding that, yeah, this is actually going to be an operational practice that we're going to have to engage with, and it's no longer these projects that happen within IT. And like, we need to help our customers solve these problems as well and be a part of the conversation and the dialogue. That's massive. It was great to see the presence, from Microsoft and Google, and I just think that was interesting. I don't know if you guys had thoughts on that at all.
I think Mitch from Google said, I wish I could quote her. She said something about, it's one thing to make $1 from your customer, but they want to make the right dollar.
Yeah.
They don't want to make it from customers' mistakes or, I think that understanding that their customer is a relationship, they model that very well. And I don't think that the other providers are in conflict with that either. Some will always model it a little bit in their own way, and others will follow. And I think that we're seeing that sort of convergence of that way of thinking. I think that mindset has always been in all of the cloud providers.
Sure.
But it hasn't always been safe to say it out loud.
There was fear. Yeah, the first time that I saw Satya talk about and use the phrase FinOps on stage.
Yeah.
And I worked at Microsoft for 8 years, and then I was a consultancy that was just focused on Microsoft, and it was just something that I'm sure they were aware of.
Yeah.
But speaking it out loud brings power to it. And you notice that the FinOps community has done a lot to move forward just the knowledge domain that is FinOps. And that has been transformational. But when you start to get the hyperscalers involved, now you've got things like Focus coming out, which I know we want to talk about. And that's an actual impact on the technology problem, not necessarily just solving the problem, right? And you see that happen very quickly after Microsoft and Google start to get very involved. Now they're a part of this community, and they're helping us solve challenges as well. That's huge.
Well, I think on the Focus side, what I'm really excited about is I come more from the DevOps, CloudOps space towards seeing the necessity to bring those types of principles on the finance side. So that was kind of the angle of my approach towards FinOps over the years. And Deana knows this well from our time together. Part of the engineering challenge, and you've heard a lot of people talk about it in breakouts here around the tension of how do I motivate engineers? How do I inspire them? And it's funny to hear everyone kind of find the word
headline for that,
the word they're comfortable saying about get people to do something, right? But that lead time to action is on everyone's mind. And from a DevOps perspective, I think the friction point with all of the work in the FinOps stuff was like, okay, but how do we automate this so that you're not pulling me into room to do a manual chore here, right? And so for the technologist side, there's always been that frustration of by nature it's one-off, right? Because now I'm looking at the last month's thing, and you're telling me that I got to evaluate last month's recommendation or whatever it may be. And there was, I think, this frustration that wasn't continuous in the technology implementation enough for engineering teams to really grab onto it, right? So there's this tension. And now in focus, you see something that I know
Right.
DevOps and people are going to be like, okay, now we got some leverage. Now I get it, right?
Yes. Think of what it stands for, cost and usage specification.
Yeah.
It's an agreement that it's a specification. And so it's taking all of these data points and specifying what they mean and where they overlap and how they differ. And they're being very clear on their definitions. And I don't think that is I don't think that should be threatening for any technology provider that is confident in the services that they provide. Be open, be transparent, let people develop on your technology, and bring more minds in.
Yep.
Let them collaborate with the same amount of information. Don't give them the fear that, well, I don't want to propose this idea because my boss might disagree. Let them come to it in the same energy as an open source community does, as peers, as people who are curious, and coming from all of their different contexts, so that we expose all of the different ways that the first iteration is not going to serve everyone, but it's going to serve the problems that we already know exist, and we'll iterate from there. I'm still learning. It's so new to all of us.
Yeah.
But based on Udam and Mike and the people who are working on it, I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, it'll give the community practice on how to approach these problems. You know, there's industry examples of this going really well. There's industry example and like opening up the next phase of scale for an industry, which I hope this becomes for FinOps, right? Because it has the potential to be pretty disruptive in a good way.
Yeah.
I mean, in cloud spend space, others in security space have struggled to get alignment around specs like this as security policy specs, right? And so there's some good examples around the industry of like what not to do, what to do. And so I think it's an exciting moment. I'm personally looking forward to get more involved in that project.
I'm looking forward to seeing you more involved in that.
Yeah, it's going to
contributing.
I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of when something like that comes up and you get leaders excited and you sort of wake up a group of people who have accomplished a lot, have done a lot in their careers, and realize that, this is the next place that we can apply that learning, because it is an iterative process that has not had that application yet. So this is really, we're just starting. And given that, where FinOps can go is so far beyond just cloud bill management. Natalie said the words of, did you hear her when she said full stack FinOps?
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard that before. And it was my favorite thing because I detest that in a job description of full stack anything.
Yeah.
But what she said made sense because the way you frame it as these are a set of capabilities, and the way that you look at efficiency and context and practice, you can apply this not just to your cloud bill, but to your SaaS bill. And SaaS companies know they can't keep it simple. They can't put it all in a black box and say, please pay this amount.
That's right.
And be self-sustaining.
That's right.
They've got to be able to know what they make difficult for their customers jeopardizes their relationships with their customers,
Spot on.
as you know.
You don't want to lock in your customers with complexity. You want to lock in your customers with value, right?
Yes.
So this is absolutely a step in the right direction. And I agree, there's a lot of conversation around what's next for FinOps, and we don't know, but we know that it is going to iterate, it is going to evolve. It probably will go beyond the cloud at some point in time because technology is getting more and more complex, And the cloud obviously brings a set of issues and complexities that need to be solved. But so does SaaS. So do all these other components that exist outside of the public cloud per se.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so much introduction of technology happening at breakneck speed that there's always going to be challenges to go figure out. But the fact that there is a community that's focused on that just means that you're not in it alone.
I think all of us are. Sorry, I think all of us are technologists, and so we think about things maybe from an engineering bias. But I also have that. I'm informed by financial processes and accounting processes, which are necessary rigor to keep any business healthy. And a lot of the people coming into FinOps are folks with that finance, the depth of knowledge of why it's so important to keep a company healthy, to have those constraints. But you know what? A lot of their processes were command and control.
Yeah.
They weren't collaborative or generative for a lot of good reasons, regulation, compliance, but understanding where that rigor is unnecessarily applied
Or detrimental.
might be able to unlock finance processes from the rigidity that that barrier to agility. Yeah.
It reminds me of when Agile started to become really popular. It was disrupting an established way of thinking and operating that existed for so long, but clearly made sense in some cases, but wasn't always making sense at scale. And then when you had a different way of thinking about delivering value, you now have a choice of going, well, do we want to use the established methods or do we want to think in this new way? And it's totally contextual. It just depends on where in the business and what problems you're trying to solve. But you're right. It is going to be a very different way of thinking about finance that goes against the norms that have been around for, decades and decades and decades.
I would say too that it's cyclical, and understanding compatibility between levels of maturity in your life cycle are really important. Like, I do think that there are kinds of economies that benefit a lot from resisting change, because the stability is sustainable. I think when stability becomes sustainable, the only changes can be small changes. But when we know that it's actually the systems themselves that are imposing a high cost to change, that's when we don't get agile.
That's right. So Kyle, I know we just met with Deana and we really appreciate her jumping on, but I wanted to continue the conversation and talk a little bit more about what you saw. You spent a good amount of time. I was working the booth and kind of meeting in the expo hall, but I know you went to a lot of the breakout sessions where a lot of the thought leadership is happening and plenty of themes and takeaways. I want to start with one that I heard a lot about. We talked to customers who are early stage in their journey, organizations that are just now starting off with FinOps, people that have been enrolled for 2 months. And it was exciting to see them here. We also talked to practitioners that have been doing it for their organization for 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. Every single organization we spoke to was really dialed in on this word efficiency, which I know we've been talking a lot through the series and in the podcast, and certainly I think it's a theme of 2023 at this point for most organizations. And I know automation came up a lot this time, more so than a lot of the conversation in the world of FinOps. I think it's tied to that efficiency. It's getting the practitioners and the teams out of the weeds so they can focus on more strategic components of just the financial operations program. Was there any big takeaways for you around automation and some of the discussion that was happening?
It was encouraging to hear how much conversation there was around it. Clearly a key concern people had, still have, and will have for quite some time, because this is one of the most complex areas to get right.
Sure.
It challenges the principle of collaboration in a very like manifest way. It's like, okay, in order for this to work, you're now affecting runtime workloads that are critical to the business, that other teams operate, that are responsible for reliability. Their incentive package is tied to, reliability numbers for this. So, in breakouts, it's interesting to see different defensive mechanisms people take around, like, well, you can opt out of this automation if,
Sure.
So there's a lot of escapes from that sort of
the light switch kind of approach, like turn the light switch on if you want it, or turn it off if you don't want it.
Yeah. And so what I think we'll see is this community, cloud ops, platform engineering communities having to come together much more, because on that side, it's all about orchestration.
Yep.
Right. And so all the efficiency outcomes that people want, in order to get it, you're going to have to be able to tightly integrate with orchestration. In one of the keynotes, Mike was talking about getting the next step, getting data in the path. And he was talking about getting in the engineering path, right? So right now it's kind of off to the side, and then it's like we bring it into the table. Yeah. We try to, sort of scrum around that and like get some action. And, on almost every breakout I was in, there's some bullet point around how do I motivate engineering, or how do I try to get them to do something, right? And I think we need those communities, those silos, the silos to be broken down between those communities, so that the insights to action, lead time, release starts to shrink down.
Yep. That
it's in those orchestration systems, right? That those changes are safe. It'll give all of the FinOps, feedback loops and observability much more credibility.
Sure.
When the actions are hitting prod. Like, we, in the engineering communities, when whatever makes it to prod first is like king of the hill.
Sure.
Right. Sure. And it is hard, especially in enterprises, it is hard
red tape
to tear it down. Right. Yeah. So I think there's a necessity for that dream, to walk that path of collaboration through orchestration with all of the engineering systems, CI/CD, paths, infrastructure management paths, all those teams, to say, like, here's how we safely flow these insights to action in prod. And then I think you'll see more talks here showing the outcomes of that efficiency. Yeah. We used to run here, and now it's here at this at this level. There was even one talk where somebody was talking about efficiency engineers, is what they called that.
I want that title.
I think that probably played well in this community. It will not play well with engineering community, because what am I, the inefficiency engineer? Like that.
Sometimes.
I think the better way for FinOps is to bring the efficiency value. Like, we're not the only ones with that concern, but they enable it in a deeper way for engineering, right? And so that collaboration is going to be key for this.
It's interesting how, I would say historically, financial operations has been very manual.
Yes.
It just has been. It's the nature of the life cycle of these kinds of things. And then there's a pendulum swing to be focused on automating everything. Because, to be fair, usually people that are FinOps practitioners, some data analysts like to be data analysts. They like to be in the weeds, and they like to be doing these things. But I think most of them want to take their firefighter hats off, right? And actually strategically think about higher level ways of ensuring that finances don't get to a place where you have to react and put out the fire. But the notion is being challenged of, now we're just going to automate everything to fix that, because it has to be practical. Yep. And to your point, I mean, when you talk about production systems and all of these, businesses are complex. You cannot automate everything automation does mean risk in a lot of ways, especially when you're messing with workloads and you're changing the characteristics of resources on the cloud without human intervention. That's challenging. That's not easy to palate for a lot of customers. And I say customers, but a lot of organizations. And so this conversation around practical applications of automation, where can we automate things in a way that allows us, it reduces the overall manual workload on our plates, but it's not so risky that we're taking the human element totally out of it. And there's this conversation about building workflows for businesses where it's not just, hey, we're going to let this AI tool run our Kubernetes. That's a little hard to palate for most organizations. But if I can have some sort of engagement where I know this makes sense for my development lifecycle, my operational lifecycle, and I have some input to that, that becomes very powerful. That might be the next stage of automation in the world of FinOps, is customizable automation, essentially.
Yeah, because it's a very multi-dimensional problem, right? You need a lot of different signals coming together to make it safe, the right action to take. It's not just about, is CPU utilization low, right? Okay, great, go kill it or give it a 3-day window. Although some of those things are the low-hanging fruit, and that might be applicable. But it's certainly, you get more complex architectures that exist, you need all those dimensions. You need the historic patterns. You need to know, well, can I sort of canary this change? Can I do it on a small set and see if signals respond poorly, latency spikes now, and I made the wrong decision. Okay, let's back that out, right? It is a complex problem, and this is why Nirvana state feels very far away. As we sit today.
That's right, and certainly the FinOps leaders are the newest ones to the table. So, your past life, right, being in engineering and developers, you have somebody come pull up a chair and sit down and go, hey, we want to auto scale your resources. We want to power them off. And she's like, hold on a second. We work to make sure this architecture works for the business and for the value for the customers, internal and external. And now you just want to change the nature of that automatically. It just doesn't jive. So that was an interesting, conversation throughout this week is how to use automation practically. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And a lot of organizations are solving that in little components. There's a lot of sharing around. Hey, here's how we thought about automation in this one way, but certainly we'll be thinking about that from a product perspective of how do we give a little bit more control to have those practical workflows. So I think probably the final thing I'd like to discuss is we released our research, our industry insights last week around the real state of FinOps, and in a lot of ways shocked most people that read it to go, shocked the world. Well, at least, it's brought up certainly a lot of discussion and a lot of challenge, which was really cool. And that's what we like. In fact, I'll tell you this because I think it's just an interesting story. Somebody said to me, well, hey, I challenged you on that because, well, we've moved the needle on reporting and visibility and tagging. And I had to pause and say, you're not really challenging us. Right, we reached out to 500 organizations and we surveyed IT leaders and engineers and developers at large organizations. So you're really challenging the data. The big headline was only 1 in 500 of the respondents has felt that there's been a tangible impact to the business to date. I understand that there's nuance in that question because when you ask, have you seen a tangible outcome from a program? Tangible outcome means anything to anybody, and it's different if you're asking a CFO or a COO or CEO or a developer or a FinOps practitioner.
But it was a pretty low bar,
tangible outcome, right? And so it's open to interpretation. There's a bit of an identity conversation happening where it feels like a lot of the folks that were here are still trying to think about how do we capture the wins, because every inch can be a mile. I keep saying that. When you make a little bit of headway in the world of FinOps, if you're not in the world of financial operations, it may seem nuanced and small, but it's cleaning up technical debt at a large scale. And so every inch really can be a mile, but it's hard to market that. I'd ask you, any comments on just that talk track in general, but how do FinOps leaders start to be better collaborators with leaders so that the folks that are out, like in the outer bands of this, understand the challenge that's constantly going to be there so that the success is felt at a larger scale?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that just came to mind as you were talking about that, Andrew Schaefer, who's a thought leader in the DevOps community. I heard him. I don't know if he coined it, but I think he did. But he would talk about engineering as it's like Tetris, where mistakes stack up and success disappears.
Yeah, that's
like,
right. That's pretty. Yeah.
And so FinOps has that similar operational dynamic that engineering ops feels, where it's like when we make mistakes, it's so visible.
Sure.
Right? Like wasted, you see all that, and here's the opportunity. But to your point on firefighting, this is why firefighting is incentivized so much in enterprises, because that is so easy to identify. Huge problem. We put this person on it to go put that fire away.
Let's go. Right. Yeah.
But the forest management side, to continue that metaphor, the people going out there preventing the problem.
Right.
That is
controlled burns.
Yeah, it is so much harder to identify and say like that's the value, right?
How do you put a metric or a KPI on avoidance?
Yeah, so this has been, over the last few years, I've tried several things in, the organization I was in to get this across, because we would make engineers go do things, right? Like, okay, architecturally, we're going to change this or that. And it would change the curve of spend.
Sure.
Right. And you annualize that, you're like, that 1 week push saved us $3 million this year.
Great headline.
And then what happens? They're like, well, I never got a bill for that. You're like, that wasn't
didn't
real
actually spend
money,
it.
right? So, we developed a savings pipeline, like the inverse of a sales pipeline to accumulate that. You see, certain solutions stack up dashboards on opportunity. There was a talk by Nationwide, I think, was the breakout, where they developed they call it Coin, which is their system to kind of score how teams are doing in this regard for the opportunity of savings versus they kind of gamified it. So they're, which I think is really smart. They're kind of addressing that incentive structure, right? To both identify the positive behaviors, and I think that's really smart. I think it's a good pattern for people to follow. So you do have to find in your organization, and I think there are broad market or industry lessons here around this, but certainly you got to find a way to incentivize the upfront behavior. Everybody is talking about shifting FinOps left, and there's other language around that, but the sad reality of the enterprise today is that firefighters get the headlines, they get the all hands shout outs, they get the spot bonuses.
Tangible.
It is tangible.
That's right.
It is tangible.
It's hard to quantify the intangibles.
Yeah, and if you snap your fingers and you have a very mature process and you're preventing, the sort of opportunity cost, there's like, well, you never saw the problem.
Right.
You never saw it because we did a bunch of great work.
My last life, we used to call it the hero dashboard, which is like, here's how much we've saved. And it's so awesome to pull that up and annualize it and then look at it in 3 years and all of that stuff. But we're learning that there has to be a balance between proactive and reactive.
Yep.
There's never not going to be a firefighting with it. And to your point about Tetris, in a lot of ways, it's almost akin to security, where it takes a lot of work to have a really smooth organization that's doing all the right things. And it takes the smallest mistake to unravel a big portion of that. And there's always going to be those mistakes, which is why I feel confident in saying, and I think just being here this week really validated a lot of what we know and what we saw in the data, that when we say financial operations, that word operations is real now. And most companies now are understanding that. The past few years, you've seen a lot of companies say, we'll run this as a project, we'll run it as a pilot, we'll incubate it, we'll have a couple people on staff that maybe focus on it.
Yeah.
Just like security operations and dev operations and all of these other, IT operations, it's never going to be totally fixed or solved.
Yeah.
There's no end state. Deana said that best. And,
Yeah.
and the foundational aspects will always need to be nurtured and watered, right? Like we talk about the what I'd call the boring stuff. I know you mentioned this to me earlier. Like we've all talked about tagging.
Yeah.
For years.
Yeah.
Still a struggle.
Yeah, it is not a problem we've swept off the table,
right,
to any degree.
We love, us geeks in this world, we love to talk about the fun stuff, the stuff that's like on the edge, like gamification, unit economics and custom metrics, all this, anomaly detection, all this fun stuff. But at the end of the day, there's a core set of things that have to be done right and have to constantly be kept up with, which is, true visibility to your organization and your business leaders, tagging that works all the time and is kept up and managed, and even things, just like empowering people with knowledge because things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
How many new services are the hyperscalers introducing every quarter at this point that have different cost structures that we've never seen before?
Yeah.
And so those foundational aspects, the operational aspects, are always going to be there. And no matter where you are in your journey, people are still struggling with those things, but we're learning.
You make a good point. I think the bar has to be for this community and the solutions that we bring into this, equip the community with, is we do have to start sweeping some of those problems off the table to say, like, this used to be a nightmare and now you don't have to think about it anymore.
Right.
And right now you still hear and you still feel like nobody expects anything to be taken off the table.
Sure.
And I think, ourselves included as, vendors looking to bring value to the community, we got to take that as a kind of personal challenge to be
Absolutely.
Like, we have to be able to identify the things that people are struggling with and wipe it off the table.
That's right. I think that brings me to my last thing, and I'm sure this is just an easy yes answer. Is, as leading our engineering and being, the CTO here, you hopefully walk away with a lot of insights to go back to our product and our solutions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good conversation, a lot of good emerging things. I am particularly, because I'm an engineer, the focus initiative. I think if we do this well, and I'm saying we because we're going to get involved in
all the
this.
people upstairs.
We're going to get involved. If we do that right, I think it ushers in a sort of second wave of growth.
Yeah, we just walk up another step.
Yeah. So that's always a big milestone for communities when they can impact an industry to that degree, not just surround it with services and activities and principles, but they can actually affect change on an industry. And this is one of those examples.
Yeah. Well, that's very important. And obviously, one of the biggest goals that we have when we come to events like this is, how do we learn?
Yeah.
We want to be a part of the discussion. We want to meet with organizations that maybe don't know us and extend our brand for sure. But most important is, how do we react to the community and have thoughtful additions to our products that solve the challenges that folks have?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm glad you came specifically because I know that's been your goal the last couple of days. So it's good to hear that. You took a lot of nuggets with you.
Yeah, it's been great.
All right, awesome. Kyle, thanks for taking a few extra minutes. And for those listening, thanks for joining in. We'll see you next week.